You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and check us out online at beardedtheologians.com. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So in continuation of our Ephesians conversation that we've had the last few weeks, we're looking through Ephesians 5. And so, Zach, as we move through Ephesians 5, what are some things that stick out to you?
Well, you know, it starts out with great advice from Paul. Imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, as a pleasing aroma to God. I mean, that's if you take any advice from this journey with Christ, that's pretty good. But it's also a lot. You know, how do we, if we're going to imitate God, there's a lot there, especially if we do it everything we do, right? But I love the acknowledgement of, because you are his dear children. And I think a lot of times we get in our head and we judge ourselves or we judge someone else, and we forget that people are children of God, and that means something. That's not just something we say to be nice and sound pretty, you know, oh, you're a child of God. No, that it actually means something. And it should mean something to all of us, and live that life filled with love. And that means you take a look at the children of God, all of them, whether you like them or agree with them or disagree with them or what, and you view them as that first. And I think that changes our interactions with people and even with ourselves. And we begin to live into that imitate God part. So I really like the beginning of chapter 5. And Paul kind of goes into some other stuff here. That's interesting, but that's what kind of gets me going at the beginning of this chapter.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about it in our little pre-meeting, but you know, this is the chapter that gets used a lot at weddings.
Yes,
and you know, and you know, most progressive aren't really a fan of the way that the wording is on here, but I think there's a nugget here that I think we can to take from that. Is it in verse 33, he says, in any case, as for you individually, each one of you should love his wife as himself, and wives should respect their husbands. And that respect for each other,
mm-hmm.
I think gets overlooked because of what Paul says earlier.
Right.
And I think what Paul's hammering in is this sense of mutual respect, and
mm-hmm.
that he's drawing some lines in the sand, and I don't think they're not healthy lines, and I'm not a real big fan of like just specific gender roles or whatever like that. I struggle with that, but I think what he's really talking about is having a to have a healthy marriage is having a mutual respect and love and care for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's vital. And you're right. As kind of one of the things that we talked about beforehand was that the sense of this continuation of chapter 4, and
mm-hmm.
where really they should have started the whole other thought was, you know, maybe verse 6 or even later. But we find ourselves this week with this particular one is asking that question, you know, how do we imitate God?
Mm-hmm. Right. And you know, Paul goes into this and talks about sin. He talks about relationships. And I think, like you said, we have a hard time with this sometimes of, I really don't like what that says or how it says it. But Paul's talking to a specific context, to a specific culture that is vastly, vastly different than ours. And so when we try to make our context fit what Paul's saying, you get into those gender roles. You get into those stereotypes of, well, a wife must obey, you know, the husband. And it's like, well, that's not exactly what Paul's getting at here. It's the respect part, right? It's the respect in the relationship, the partnership, and going from there. And there's a lot of that in here. And I think chapter 5 and part of 6 in particular get really taken out of context with folks.
Well, and we know that, like, you look at verse 3, and you
Mhm.
touched it a little bit. That's one that we force our understanding of what sexual immorality looks like today. And Paul
Mhm.
had a different view of that. I mean, there's some basics, and I think you could make that case, but I think there's some
Sure.
things that we can't pour into that, putting it into our context for Paul's context. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat one another healthily,
Mhm.
and respect one another and care for one another. And
Mhm.
as I think about that, when we talk about imitating God, I believe that the one thing that God wants us to do is to, um, fully, not just, like, I hate to use the word submit because that's what it uses in here, but I think God wants us, our whole selves, and that
Yeah.
everything we do glorifies God.
Right.
And so that's kind of a hard, like, that's, I mean, it's not hard, but it's a hard way to live when you're trying to do it, and asking, like, really trying to live, imitating God
Yeah.
in a way that our lives show it.
Well, and that's the thing. If Paul spends some time on here in sin, and don't sin, don't do these things, don't be greedy, don't take advantage of people, don't be fooled. Those types of things are what Paul says here. And you take a look at it when you're trying to imitate God. If sin is in our lives, sin separates us from God and from people. And if we let those things creep in, we're not imitating God. We're not coming closer to God in those moments. And Paul gets at some solid advice in this, in the whole here of, if you let sin creep in, we're not imitating God, we're not coming closer, we're not living into the fullness at being this child of God, living this life filled with love. We're getting further and further from that. And so it's finding those places where sin is creeping in, and how do we get away from that? How do we move from that? Um, in at the end of verse 11, it says, and instead expose those sins, expose that, and move away from it.
Well, and I think as you were talking about that, the thing I kept thinking about is, like, what are you putting into yourself?
Sure.
And so verse 29 says, no one ever hates his own body, but feeds it and takes care of it, just like Christ does for the church. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing I always, like, I think the thing that you can always look at is, like, what does your pocketbook, what does your, what do you watch on TV,
Mm-hmm.
what do you read, what do you listen to, whether it be a podcast or music, like, how does that glorify God, and how does that feed your soul, so it can help you feed others. I think when you start wrestling with that, you'll start to see, um, kind of some things that will help you in your relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we step back and evaluate ourselves and ask ourselves, are we fully giving ourselves to God? I think hopefully you'll find some ways that you're short, because nobody ever does it perfectly. Like, there are
Right.
some things that we could always do better. We're always working towards perfection. We're never
Mm-hmm.
perfected in this life. And I think that's, um, like, we're striving for that. We're moving towards that. And the only way that we move towards that is if we're in constant evaluation. And I always think of it
Right.
like a hitter, you know, um, a hitter in baseball. One of the great hitters are always evaluating their swings, and they're never comfortable with
Right.
just,
Always
uh,
adjusting.
always adjusting, always making changes. And whether it's approach at the plate, or maybe they change their habits at home or something. And we look at, um, uh, look at the Cardinals right now, and, um, what Matt
We're
Carpenter
winning right now. I'm going to bring them up.
what Matt Carpenter's doing. His stats, in May were dismal. I mean, he was hitting like one something, and since the All Star, well, since June, he's made adjustments. And I think that's, like, that speaks true to our faith, is that we have to make adjustments.
Well, and that's the thing. I like what you bring up in a professional athlete, right? Baseball players are notorious for it. They're very superstitious, if anything, but they like their routines, and especially pitchers who only, starting pitchers for sure, they pitch every 5 days, every 4 or 5 days. And so, if they know they're pitching on Thursday, Monday is this routine, Tuesday is this routine, Wednesday is this routine, Thursday's pitch. And in that routine starts at home. And if we take that into our spiritual life, our routine has to start at home, and then it goes to work, and then it goes to lunch, and then it goes, our routine is important. And to just come to church on Sundays and that be the only routine that we have, it's not going to carry through. That may get us to Tuesday at best, if at best, right? It may not get us to Monday morning. in some cases, but it's that routine outside of Sunday, outside of the day that we're coming to church, the day that we're going to perform, the day that we're going to pitch, if you will. It's the routine that leads up to that that enhances worship, enhances our time with God. And so I think that's important as we look at this, and if we imitate God, what that really looks like. And I think that routine is important. I give you crap for bringing up more baseball references just because your Cardinals are game and a half of them are Rockies. But
but
I think it's important. I think that's an important lesson.
But I think that's where people fail in their faith, is that they get out of the routine.
Yeah.
And you'll hear people. I mean, I know you probably hear it too, because I hear it all the time. Like, we got out of the church routine,
yeah,
and now we're suffering spiritually, or we're struggling with something, and
right.
and like, yeah, I get it. Like, even pastors struggle with that, and like, I've really, one of the things that this podcast has helped me do is that it's gotten me into a healthy rhythm of. I think I read scripture more now than I ever have, not just because it's what we talk about on the podcast and other things, but like, I've noticed the difference it's made in my life.
Right.
And there are all sorts of ways to practice our faith, and would encourage you, like, here's the struggle that I have, is that when people say they can study alone, I think that's the most unhealthy thing you could ever do, because how do you know, like, and I was thinking about this, in the what verse is it? I'm trying to find it. Talks about testing. Verse 10. Therefore, test everything to see what is pleasing to God, pleasing to the Lord, and don't participate in the unfruitful actions of darkness. Well, how do you know what you're participating in if you're not testing it, and putting it to practice?
Right.
And so, like, I always call it adjustments. Like, what faith adjustments do you need? And so, like, there are times where, like, I'm not, something's not right, and so what am I not doing, or what do I need to do more of, or what do I need to let go of to be healthier? And there's some things that are easy to let go, like, if I have a bad day, like, I can let go of that sometimes a lot better than I can, I think that that's the challenge for all of us, is to think about how we practice our faith, because it is a practice. It's not just like, I think what happens is we get in this attitude. There's this attitude out there that you're done.
Yeah.
And that you do these things and you're done. And that's not what it's about. It's about working on yourself to be a better person, and be in better relationship and right relationship with God and other people. And that takes time. It takes practice. It's not something that just changes overnight. It does take a focus on God and the Spirit. And the only way that I know that you can do that is through dialogue with the scriptures. And that's dialogue with yourself in the scriptures. That's dialogue with yourself and scriptures and other people to affirm or learn, or, and I think, the question for us this week to share with our listeners, to wrestle with, is, how are you imitating God?
Yeah. What's your routine? What's your rhythm?
And so we'd call you into that, not just to, like, we'll hold you accountable for that, because I think it'll be healthier for you to focus on that and think about what can help you in your faith and your journey. If you ask yourself, how am I imitating God in everything I do? And when you can recognize that, it'll be amazing to see what you can accomplish through God and with God's help. And I think that's where we're coming at.
Yeah, I think so too. And we'd love for you to share that with us on our Facebook, on the website, beardedtheologians.com, or any of our social media platforms. I'd love to hear how people are getting that rhythm, imitating God. What are the things you do? Both individually and in community.
Yeah.
Because I think those are important.
Well, and as we bring the show to a close this week, I want to, we're getting closer to Christmas. I know that sounds crazy, but the Advent Christmas calendar, Advent calendar came out this week from Cokesbury. And so with that in mind, probably in the next few weeks, we'll be running our Teespring t-shirts again. Yes. Those are awesome t-shirts for Christmas gifts. If you know some people that are looking for some Christmas gifts for someone, or even as a Christmas gag gift. If you're in a room with a bunch of bald people that have no beards, what a great shirt to give somebody than a Bearded Theologians t-shirt. I'm just saying.
A beard shirt.
They do not look like the one shirt that Zach has on, because we had some They're just not really that great a shirt design.
This is a Teespring shirt.
I know the
like
t-shirt.
that
It's a great t-shirt. It's just where the beards are placed. We were asked not to put the beards there.
That's true. That's true. It's
So-
a good guy's shirt.
It's a good, well, but so we encourage you to go, stay in conversation with us. We hope that this Ephesians study has been good for you, because I know it's been good for us as we continue to have conversation about this, and we're kind of getting close to the end of Ephesians. And so we encourage you to come back next week and listen for chapter 6, and give us some likes and some plugs. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.